But one thing that just occurred to me as you were talking about the initial reason for establishing the marae, I guess with the closure of some of the meatworks and things, there's not the big influx of labour that there might have been previously. Where are you drawing your members from today? Are there different industries that they're becoming involved in, or are these the family of those members originally? How's it operating today?
Yes, no, we've got, for example, I married my lovely wife, who's a first generation Ocean Beach freezing works lovely lady. So her father came down in the early 70s, late 60s to actually work at the Ocean Beach freezing works. So we've got 2-3 generations of that particular whānau that moved down at that time. And we do have a population of our whānau that come down to SIT to study.
Oh, yeah.
There's a range of whānau that are here. So obviously, back in the day when there were huge employment opportunities with the freezing works and so on and so forth, we obviously don't have the same opportunities at this time.
But you're adapting to the needs of the time, and that's great.
Hey, just finally, Daniel, you did mention that, going forward, you say that you often wonder about young people and their connection to a marae today. What of that?
Right, okay. What I was alluding to there is the fact that, the aroha and the generosity and the reciprocity of our founding whānau to be, to actually show that, to role model really positive types of community-focused aroha by remortgaging their homes so we could have a place. People, young people these days, I don't believe, unless you've been part of a whānau like that, you can feel the aroha, you understand, the lengths that individuals would go to that would put the community and the whānau before themselves. Is something that I think we need more of in these modern times.
It's great to have you on, and if I can find a DVD of Backbenchers, I'll send it to you, mate.
Signed. Thank you very much. Kia ora whānau, thank you.
Kia ora.
Daniel Tamaroa there, 40 years of a wonderful small marae, ngā hoe e wha marae, wonderful story, and that connection is pretty important, right?
That's so crucial, especially in that remote sort of area. I reckon ngā hoe wha could solve the problem of the whare pukapaka, the finding a library, like a place that we can house all the books.
Putting the stories together.
Don't you reckon they could do it?
What a journalist. What a journalist. I was just old enough to vote in the election. We voted an MMP. I'm keen on lowering the threshold. My boyfriend way back then was studying politics, so he explained how MMP works, and I've often had to explain it to people, but they still often don't take it in. But gosh, on a final note, Peter, what Grant Duncan said, no threshold. Just think about that for a minute,
huh? You can't have that. But tell you one thing, there was a survey put out a few weeks ago by the New Zealand Initiative, and I think it showed that with even now, less than half the population says it fully understands MMP, and that's a real worry after 25 years.
I feel that people's judgment of MMP gets clouded over because of the tail wagging the dog in the last few elections, and that just,
Ruani Pereira and Peter Dunn, you've been wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to Melita Tala for putting the show together. I'm Willis Chapman. Checkpoint is next. Back with you tomorrow, 3:45. See ya.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. The government's multi-million-dollar tourism recovery package could reserve it a first-class seat in court after a cluster of businesses query who got grants and loans and why exactly. Is Labour's education policy a reheat with more free lunches but no expansion of fees free? The Nashes are well and truly out on the campaign trail. We're talking dental policy, of course, and some Auckland rest homes are letting visitors back in again despite no change in the alert level. The government widens the red carpet for the Wallabies, and we check out New Zealand's newest luxury hotel, where rooms are being snapped up for $1,000 a night. Who's paying that?
Rnz News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. The police have been fielding dozens of calls from the public after an appeal for victims of historical sexual offending at an Auckland boys' school to come forward. 7 men have now been arrested as part of the investigation into Dilworth School, an independent boarding school for boys from low-income families founded 125 years ago. Jordan Bond reports.
A 60-year-old man was today charged with sexual violation, attempted sexual violation, indecency and indecent assault. 6 other men aged between 68 and 78 years old face similar charges for offences said to have been carried out from the 1970s to the early 2000s. Detective Senior Sergeant Jeff Baber says the police have received more than 50 calls and emails since making an appeal yesterday. The men are expected to appear in court next month. Call Jordan Bond. Aho.
A prisoner escaped custody while returning from a visit to Middlemore Hospital on Friday while handcuffed to a guard. 22-year-old Katrina Ipiha is serving a life sentence for murder at Auckland Regional Women's Prison. She is still on the run. Andrew McRae reports.
Katrina Ipiha was taken to the hospital in the early hours of Friday morning for treatment for an injury that couldn't be carried out at the prison. She was accompanied by 2 officers and handcuffed to one of them. Corrections won't say how she managed to escape, but say a full operational review is underway. The Regional Commissioner, Lynette Cave, says Corrections have provided police with information to assist them to locate Ipiha. She says the prisoner is likely to be charged with escaping custody, which can result in a maximum 5-year sentence. Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
A COVID data modeller says people who may have been infected at an Auckland gym may not have enough of the virus to test positive for a few days. The Ministry of Health has identified up to 94 possible close contacts of a healthcare worker with the virus and is asking all of those close contacts of those 94 people, such as household members, to be tested. Auckland University physicist Sean Hendy says some may not test positive right away, even if they have the coronavirus.
It takes a while for people who, after they're exposed, to develop enough of the virus to be sensitive to the test. Over the next few days, we should see whether or not we've picked up secondary infections.
Meanwhile, health officials say the healthcare worker with COVID-19 was most likely exposed at the Auckland quarantine facility where they worked. The New Zealand Stock Exchange website is down, thought to be because of another cyber attack. The website has been unscathed for about 2 weeks after it suffered a run of what are known as distributed denial of service attacks last month, which overwhelmed the service. An NZX spokesperson says since the initial attacks, provisions were put in place, allowing investors to see announcements on another platform, so trading does not need to cease. A politics professor's details are featured in a huge leak of data amassed by a company believed to be used by China's intelligence service. The information was initially leaked from Junhua Data, a company based in the southern Chinese city of Shenzhen, to an American academic, Christopher Balding. Canterbury University Professor Anne-Marie Brady says politicians, their families, defence officials and diplomats are included in a list identifying 793 New Zealanders.
It's data that's useful for collecting information on political and economic elites to potentially turn them into assets, potentially blackmail them, to find out what their views on the Chinese Communist Party government are.
Anne-Marie Brady says only 10% of the details of more than 2 million people worldwide are recoverable from the database. It's 5:04. New Zealand Rugby will consider any request by All Blacks players to pull out of the Rugby Championship campaign on a case-by-case basis. RNZ understands a group of players don't want to leave their young families for up to 10 weeks, which could include spending Christmas in quarantine upon their return. Those players include First Fives Richie Mo'unga and Beauden Barrett. New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson says they want to have the tournament wrapped up by early December.
We are working really hard to make sure that the tournament is finished by December 5 or 6. so that the players will be back and out of quarantine a week or so before Christmas. That's really important to us. We're like any employer. We want to do the right thing by them and ensure that they can have the appropriate time to consider all the ramifications of being away for that period of time.
Meanwhile, Otago midfielder Sio Tompkinson has been suspended for 6 weeks after being sent off in his side's match against Auckland at the weekend for a dangerous tackle. The Breakers have signed American Colton Iverson as their second import for the new Australian National Basketball League season. The 2.13 metre or 7 foot tall centre moves to Auckland, having most recently played in Russia. He was drafted by the Indiana Pacers in 2013 but never played in the NBA. Chelsea have got their English Premier League football campaign off to a winning start with a 3-1 win at Brighton and Hove Albion, as did the Wolves, who had a 2-0 win over Sheffield United. And that's the news.
A test match on election day?
There is a huge appetite for distinctly New Zealand sport. I think it would be a big boon for the government.
We know senior ministers and officials have come out saying they'd be flexible and open to when the game could be played on that weekend.
Do I think it will have an impact on election in an evening match? Not with early voting, not with voting during the day, no.
An All Black game may not be the top rating program for the night.
Ruck and More, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Severe west to northwest gales expected for central and southern New Zealand today, returning to Canterbury and coastal Southland tomorrow. So for Northland to Kapiti, including the Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the central high country, a few showers, possibly thundery in Horowhenua and Kapiti, clearing tomorrow morning, then fine spells. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with high cloud at times, a few showers tomorrow morning. Wairarapa and Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury and Otago except Clutha. A few showers spreading north today, possibly heavy and thundery about coastal Otago this afternoon. Fine tomorrow with increasing high cloud. Bulletu Fiordland, also Stewart Island, showers, heavy at times today with hail and isolated squally thunderstorms. For Clutha and Southland, occasional showers, possibly thundery in Clutha this afternoon, snow above 500 metres. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers frequent overnight with possible thunderstorms. RNZ National, it is 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks for joining us. Tonight, the net widens for those needing to be tested as a result of the Les Mills COVID case. And we have the latest promises from the election campaign. But first, more than $40 million in tourism grants may have booked Minister Kelvin Davis a seat in court with a number of operators unhappy with the way the money has been dished out. The government's named about 80 businesses that have got funding and loans as part of its strategic tourism assets protection program, including AJ Hackett Bungee, Discover Waitomo, Rotorua Zorb and Wellington Zoo, to name just a few. As part of the qualifying criteria, businesses had to be a key attraction, nationally or internationally recognised, generate significant spillover benefits for the region, a region that would be significantly diminished should the business fold. Now, 24 South Island tourism operators are questioning how the money was carved up and are asking for a please explain from the Minister. I asked Fiordland Jet co-owner Chris Adams, what's wrong with the scheme?
Everything's wrong with it. Let me just start by first saying, if you don't mind, that no one in the tourism industry actually started off by asking for handouts. We have good times and bad times, and you soldier on through it. But with this program, it was letting people apply under financial duress, and I don't think too many people could have applied for that.
Why don't you think too many people could have applied?
Well, the criteria was, and remembering we're only 10 weeks into COVID, it looked like the Australian bubble was about to open up back in June when it opened up. That was, you had explored every financial avenue. You were a major player in your tourism town, and they were two of the criteria, and very few people, if any, after coming out of a great summer season, could say they'd financially used all their avenues 10 weeks into COVID.
So did you think you qualified?
Absolutely not. One of the things, being a major player based in Te Anau, there are no major players. We're a whole lot of little outfits that stay together to make a town what it is and encourage tourists to come. So, no. And as I said,
to exhausted all your financial avenues, did that mean we had to sell our personal house? We just didn't think so, and we didn't think at any stage we were able to apply.
So you're talking about one of the criteria that specified that you should be, well, iconic in essence in your region or abroad, and that you contribute significantly to the broader economy in your region. So based on those, you took a look at yourself and you thought, nah, that's not us, and we haven't exhausted every avenue because we haven't sold our house.
Correct. In my opinion, we are the best and we are the most important tourism business in Te Anau. But no, we definitely couldn't have signed to say that we had exhausted all financial and that we were a major player and significant to the town. All the tourist operators are significant to the town.
So did you apply?
No, we did not apply because it looks like we were too honest.
So what's your beef now then? Because some people will look at this and say, if you didn't apply, you should have, because you should have let them decide whether you were eligible for the money or not.
That is a fair point. As I pointed out at the start, we didn't go asking for handouts. So this came along. Not everyone actually was able to have this sent to them or find it. It was open for 14 days. And when we read through it all, you only have one thing in life, and that's your name. And to sign your name to something that we didn't believe we actually ticked all the criteria, we're not in it to do that, and that's not what life's about.
So would you benefit from that assistance? And if you could get it now, would you?
Oh, 100%. So disappointed in ourselves for not applying. And what's now happened is, if no one had got these handouts, we stayed on a level playing field. Now, some of the companies that have got these handouts are a lot smaller outfits than us. Some of them, in one Maori Corporation, they have 1.9 billion, is my understanding, in assets, yet closed down a whole of their tourism operations, laid all their staff off, turned the power off in their workshops, and applied for it, and now going to cherry-pick the season. One in particular is going to start on December the 3rd for the summer season. We have tried to stay afloat. We've tried to keep all our staff on. We've tried to find them a wee bit of outside work where we can to try and keep going, to look after our town, to look after our customers and be there in the future.
So I'm sure you've had a look at the list or know some of the people on the list or organisations that have got the money. Is there any in particular that you take exception to? Is it the big businesses that have got funding that doesn't sit well with you?
Yeah, how when the government looks at it, have exhausted all financial avenues when they have that many assets? As I said, did we have to sell our own personal house to have done that? Smaller operators that were 10 weeks in after having a great summer season, tourism's been outstanding for the last few years, could sign their name to that. They've now got $500,000 each to go in competition to us, and it's a struggle. It's now an uneven playing field.
So there's a couple of other jet operators that have got money. AJ Hackett, is that one that you raise an eyebrow at?
Oh, most definitely. What have they done with their money? How can they sign to that? As I said, all you have in life is your name, and the government, under the rules of the application, can they actually have signed to all those avenues?
What do you need the money for now?
Wages, the wage subsidy has been outstanding, but we're now finished with that. We aren't going to have an overseas tourist season. Local Kiwis don't do jet boat operations in our one. We are the best operation out there. But Kiwis coming down are only going to do one or two adventure activities, and we just want to survive. We want to be here. Like New Zealand actually has had a great name out of COVID overseas, and I believe once COVID's over, New Zealand will be ready to go. But how many operators will still be able to survive? And we just need to pay our bills day to day.
So what are you going to do then? What's the next step? Because there's a few of you down there, as I understand it, that are not entirely happy with the way this has unfolded. So what's the option for you?
In our case, and as I said in Te Anau, a whole lot of little players, a lot of them are actually significant to the area. We're all significant to the area. So we are looking to see if there is any legal avenue to level the playing field up. As I said, we didn't ask for a handout, but now that they've been given out, we can't compete.
So, Chris, you're talking potentially about a judicial review, are you, to look at the criteria and how people have been funded?
Look, we're just asking the question. In my case, I have never wrote or rang a member of parliament before. 3.5 weeks ago, I sent an email to my local parliamentary lady. She sent emails back as, look, I want to talk to you personally on the phone. She didn't want to, but in the finish, like, I'm sick of emails that get you nowhere. So she rang up. She was very understanding. I sent an email through official to go to the Minister of Tourism and to the state. The only email I've had back was after 2.5 weeks from some sidekick of his saying they had received my email and would get a reply in due course. Well, we had 2 weeks to reply. They've had now 3.5 weeks, and I haven't even got the decency to give me an answer of why the setup is like it is.
So you're talking to a lawyer instead now?
Yeah, we're just sounding out our options because, as I said, how do we compete with those that got it? And those that got it, in my mind, good luck to them. They can sleep at night that they made all that criteria, and let's have a review. There's a high chance there'll be another COVID come in the future. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again so companies like us aren't left high and dry.
Do you feel in some way, Chris, that you're just keeping your nose above the waterline?
Oh, 100%. Look, we're working really hard to try and attract work incentive groups. Like Tiana is a wonderful place, but with Auckland and the new level 2.5, we haven't had the numbers down there from Auckland. That's where our population is at the moment. We're just not getting the tourists through. And to let our staff go, they're like family. And to get them back again, we don't want to do that.
So, to sum it up, Chris, do you think this whole funding program has been a misstep by the government? Because businesses got $44 million. That's got to be good for tourism, doesn't it?
Absolutely not. AJ Hackett got $5 million of that. They've had good years. You're not supposed to name names, but that's an example. It's a bit like the wage subsidy. Some of these people that applied for it didn't do through in good faith and how it was set out. And what I'm saying is, with that fund, would they not have been better to give 1,000 operators half, 50,000 each, just something to keep us going, rather than cherry pick 126 operators that now can go out and compete against us?
So while you're naming names, Waitomwa Caves, do you think they should have got it?
Look, we could go on who should and who shouldn't have, but is there going to be an inquiry into their financial situation to see if they actually were eligible for it?
You want to see some proof?
I want to see some proof, and heads need to roll. Like, it gets to the stage that some of these people in the middle management of these government departments, they have no skin in the game. There's no accountability, and they've made some companies and they've finished some companies, and they've set rules that most of us didn't apply for. Is
the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis, doing a good job for you?
Minister of who? I ask. No, he hasn't been to Te Anau. Fiordland has been the hardest hit tourism destination in New Zealand. We haven't seen him. I think he's been to Queenstown once in the last few years. What's he doing for us? My answer is absolutely nothing.
And that is Chris Adams from Fiordland Jet. And it is almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback there. What do you think of the way the government has handed out that money for so-called strategic tourism assets? We're keen to hear from you. If you got a grant or if you didn't, text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Health authorities are waiting on test results from those who are at the same Les Mills classes as a health worker who had the virus. The Ministry of Health has found up to 94 possible close contacts of a Jet Park quarantine worker who went to 3 gym classes last week while they were unknowingly infected. The Ministry has also widened the net over who should get tested. Jordan Bond reports.
The call went out for so-called contacts of contacts to be tested this morning by the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield.
Once someone is identified as a contact, if they've got family members in the same household, we recommend that those people are then tested as well. So it's the close contacts of those people, generally work or household contacts.
The ripples of this are vast. Even with 2 or 3 contacts per person, that's hundreds of people now being asked to be tested from just one case at a gym, including this woman today with her family at the Northcote Testing Centre on Auckland's North Shore.
We've got one of the contacts living with us that was attended the class, one of the classes.
It came as a bit of a shock to her. out of the blue after she felt the country had got on top of this latest outbreak.
Yes, it was. Yes. But, you never know who's around where. But you just got to do the right thing. And I wouldn't go shopping or anything knowing that I'm living with somebody that could have contracted it.
A doctor at the testing centre, Vanshdeep Tangri, says yesterday there was a rush of demand for testing, which he suspected was related to the Les Mills gym case.
A lot of people came from that group, and I think a lot of them actually did get tested as well. And then that's quite typical as well. If you get a positive somewhere, then often there's a surge in that area.
He says people who tell the staff they're connected with the case will have their results processed more quickly because there's a higher risk. Even if people are tested quickly, Auckland University data modeller and physicist Sean Hendy says it can take a few days before they test positive.
It takes a while for people who, after they're exposed, to develop enough of the virus to be sensitive to the test. Over the next few days, we should see whether or not we've picked up secondary infections.
He says the number of cases that stem from it depends on how infectious the person was when they were at the gym.
We might get lucky and there may not have been any secondary infections, or it could be that there were a substantial number of secondary infections, and so we might be looking at a little mini cluster.
Today, the 3 new positive cases were all returnees from overseas. The Ministry of Health says of the possible 94 close contacts, 72 have been confirmed as such. All but 1 have been contacted and are self-isolating, while the others being contacted and most have been tested already. I Tamaki Makoto, mo te hotako o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond. Aho.
The Labour Party is headlining its election season education policy with a promise to close the pay gap for early childhood teachers. It's also re-announced its pledge to extend its free lunch program, scrap the decile system, and to end the fees free at university after the first year of study. National says the policy is another example of Labour's failure to deliver. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough.
Children at Bernardo's in Porirua greeting Labour's Chris Hipkins with waiata and the COVID elbow bump.
Here we go. Good to see you.
Here to announce what Mr Hipkins concedes is a reheated policy, delivering more of the same.
We've had a very ambitious program of work over the last 3 years, and I think people doubted our ability to deliver on that. We're in the midst of delivering on it. We're absolutely committed to delivering on it. And so you'll see this year's manifesto is very much a continuation of the work that we've already started.
Mr Hipkins says COVID is to blame for the scrapping of fees-free for second and third year tertiary study, and Labour would instead focus on free trades training and apprenticeships. He says this isn't an admission the policy has been a failure.
No, not at all, but it is an admission that it's the sort of thing you do when the economic going is good, rather than at a time when there are so many other things that we need to invest in order to keep the country moving. So we really want to tackle some of those long-term skill shortages.
But National leader Judith Collins says this is just another broken promise.
I think this is Chris Hipkins' Kiwi Build moment. It is what they do when they want to roll back a policy because they know it doesn't work.
New Zealand Union of Students Association President Isabella Linehan-Inkin is hugely disappointed.
This was a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the cost of education not to be a barrier for people accessing it.
Labour's policy also addresses what Mr Hipkins says is a big piece of unfinished business.
One of the core commitments that the Labour Party is making is extending pay parity to all teachers working in early childhood education, making sure that they are all paid what they are worth.
It's a move welcomed by Melissa Burgess, who works at Adelaide Early Education Centre in Wellington.
There were 3 of us jumping for joy in the kitchen because we just couldn't believe it after such a long fight.
She says ECE teachers have been undervalued for far too long.
We've got the same qualification as people in kindergarten, held to the same professional standards as people in kindergarten and primary, and yet, the pay disparity was just getting worse and worse and worse.
National unveiled a $1.9 billion education package yesterday, which included extra learning support, additional teacher aid hours, and the reinstating of special charter schools. Ms Collins says increasing the number of teachers available for under-2s would be National's priority rather than pushing pay parity.
Of course, everyone would like to see everyone's wages go up. We value the early childhood teachers, and that's why we think that we should have more teachers in there rather than dictating in terms of the wages any further.
Labor is also promising to roll out its free healthy school lunches program to a quarter of all school-aged children and replace the decile system with the equity index, a policy National has also put forward. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
National wants to put a smile on your face, promising free toothbrushes, toothpaste and supervised brushing for schools in high-needs areas. But the $30 million program has left dentists underwhelmed and calling for more drastic help from all parties. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
As far as election promises go, this one is a doozy. Nope, not dental care. Body art.
I think it's time for a refresh of my views about tattoos.
Yes, Judith Collins has upped the election stakes. If Kiwis make her Prime Minister, a victory tattoo could be on the cards.
It may have to be. We'll wait and see. But it could be one of those promises I rethink in a quieter, calmer moment.
No such second thoughts for one of her ardent fans. Nick Gibbon from Te Araha has had the National leader immortalised on his body. There she is, tattooed on his leg, the MP in Bond girl fashion, aqua blue jacket and a golden gun in hand.
Judith's a bold person and I'm bold. Well, I only have one.
Isn't it wonderful? I mean, I get fan mail, obviously. I've never seen fan mail like that.
The smiles continued for Judith Collins as she dropped by a local dentist in Whanganui. And she brought her health spokesperson Shane Retty with her to unveil the party's election year dental policy.
This is a signal that we're interested in dental. That's what this is, and we're starting with children first.
And this is a really sensible way of dealing with, excuse the pun, the root of the issue.
A $30 million program would be rolled out in at-risk schools. Dental packs would be handed out to 100,000 kids a year. Toothbrushes and toothpaste tubes. A free fluoride varnish too.
For the 3 to 5-year-olds, they have volunteers or school teachers who on a daily basis supervise children to effective toothbrushing. For the older age group, they actually bring in dental therapists from the 8 to 13 and they supervise the, basically, daily toothbrushing.
But note what's not in the policy, nothing there for adults. The mounting calls for universal free dental care, or even for those on low incomes, going unanswered.
We simply couldn't afford it, and I think that you can find that with the other parties as well.
There has been high need in health, and I don't deny dental is one of them, but we have had to prioritise.
And that means no major dental policy from Labour either. At Waitangi, Jacinda Ardern marked dentistry as a potential election issue and signalled she'd like to do more. COVID-19 has pushed it off the list.
Some of the things that we may otherwise have been able to do, we may not necessarily, but we do want to maintain the quality of care New Zealanders have come to expect.
The Dental Association is dismayed. Its president, Katie Ayres, had thought they were finally getting some traction with political parties, but no.
It's just more of the same, really. More adults in pain, more adults with missing teeth, more adults being admitted to hospital and sometimes even intensive care due to the severity of their dental infection.
And for those adults, it's hard to find much to smile about this election. From Whanganui for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
With the borders closed and the country's tourism tanking, it's tough times for most hotel providers. But one Auckland outfit is hoping to buck the trend, opening today and offering the most expensive and luxurious rooms in the country. And while job losses across the country are skyrocketing, it appears there are still plenty of people with cash to splash on luxury experiences in their own backyard. Our cameraman Nick Munro and reporter Nita Blake-Person visited the Flash News setup and filed this report.
When it comes to luxury, it's all in the detail.
This is what I call finishing touches, where I just smooth out the top of the bed.
Reported to have cost $200 million to build, there are 195 rooms at the Park Hyatt, 4 restaurants and bars, an infinity pool and a fitness centre. It's smack bang in the middle of the viaduct, every room has a view, and despite opening during a global pandemic, the hotel's boss says the outlook is good.
We have been delayed by 4 months with this COVID situation, but we've got a beautiful property here at the moment, so it's good things come to those who wait, I guess.
The big spending international tourists are off the cards for now, but General Manager Brett Sweetman says rooms are filling up with Kiwi bookings.
Yeah, no, this weekend's looking very strong. So the Friday, the Saturday, we're looking to have 800 people through here a day.
The interest is so strong they've not considered becoming a quarantine hotel.
Probably not really in line with our brand through here as well. And we have these beautiful rooms which we want people to experience and have a luxurious leisure experience when here at the hotel. So it wouldn't be a road we would go down there, definitely not.
But with rooms starting at around $450 a night, it's likely they were beyond the budget for managed isolation anyway.
We also have 4 executive suites, which are 127 square metres. So they're roughly about $3,000 a night. From there as well. When we get to probably the end of October into early November, our larger suite. So we've got a presidential suite up on the rooftop, which is 245 square metres. Here, so the presidential suite, looking for probably $12,000 to $14,000 a night.
This here is the hotel's harbour suite. Moving through the large bathroom to the viaduct views, we've got the king-size bedroom as well as the additional lounge. At 71 square metres, this room costs $1,000 per night and it's the hotel's most popular room. But if all that doesn't do it for you, 100 metres away, you've got 10 New Zealand's headquarters. But with the borders closed and many New Zealanders feeling the financial pinch, who has the cash to splash on such opulence?
Staycations are very important. People can't travel overseas, so I think there's great opportunities for New Zealanders to come to this hotel, have a true international luxury experience and spoil themselves.
And if the guests are at a loss for how to treat themselves during their stay, Chief Concierge Nick Adams is on hand with some tips.
Maybe get a chauffeur driver to take them through Auckland, out to the west coast. That's probably my favourite area. Out to Piha. Anything out there, there's little secret beaches. I mean, a lot of people haven't been to Karikari, down to Karikari, up to the waterfall. We could have one of our chefs prepare lunch, take a picnic basket out.
It's not just the getaways that are proving popular for New Zealand's biggest spenders. Top Auckland restaurant The French Cafe is filling up every table it can at the moment. Spends are typically between $150 and $200 per person. Car dealers aren't doing too badly either. One Auckland dealer says there are signs of resilience across its Aston Martin, Bentley, McLaren and Lamborghini brands. But the spending is not being enjoyed across the board. The luxury market is in stark comparison to those doing it tough, with 12.1% of working-age New Zealanders now on the benefit and a recession due to be officially announced on Thursday. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake Person, aho.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the red carpet just got a little bit wider for the Wallabies with another tweak to isolation rules. What's a strategic tourism asset and what's not? We talked to an operator who was turned down for funding. And is there life on Venus? We would love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the program this evening. A lot of you getting in touch about that funding for tourism. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Anna.
Dozens of people have been contacting the police following an appeal for victims of historical sexual offending at Auckland's Dilworth School to come forward. The 7th man has today been charged with sexual violation, attempted sexual violation, indecency and indecent assault. 6 other men aged between 68 and 78 years old face similar charges. A tourism operator says the way more than $40 million in tourism grants has been dished out is unfair, and they're considering legal action. Fiordland Jet co-owner Chris Adams says it would have been very difficult for many companies to fit the government's strict criteria so early on into the pandemic. He told Checkpoint many companies had just come out of a very successful summer season, but he now wishes they had applied as they need the money. A coronavirus data modeller says it might take a while to discover if anyone else has been infected by a positive case who used an Auckland gym. Sean Hendy says people who may have been infected at the Les Mills gym in Takapuna may not have enough of the virus in their system to test positive for several days. 94 possible close contacts of the infected healthcare worker and their close contacts are being urged to get tested. A prisoner who managed to escape custody while returning from a hospital visit had been handcuffed to a guard. 22-year-old Katrina Ipiha is serving a life sentence for murder at Auckland Regional Women's Prison and remains on the run. The New Zealand Stock Exchange website is down in what's believed to be another cyber attack. An NZX spokesperson says since the initial attacks, provisions have been put in place allowing investors to see announcements on another platform, so trading does not need to cease. And the mayor of the US city of Rochester has sacked the police chief and suspended 2 other officials over the suffocation of a black man arrested in March. The mayor says a new investigation found the police did not follow approved protocols while arresting Daniel Prude. And that's the news.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time to get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton, who joins me in the studio. Nicholas, NZX, okay, so there's been a little bit of a hiatus. They were having problems with people, what are they? They're not hackers, they're cyber criminals who are downing the site, and it's happened again, has it?
Yeah, well, look, they had a pretty good run there, didn't they? It's been about 2 weeks since we heard anything about the website going down, but at about mid-afternoon today, myself and my colleague were trying to get on the NZX website and noticed that we're having great difficulty doing so. So I had a brief word with the NZX not too long ago, and they say that they understand that the reason why the website is down is due to another cyber attack. And the type of attack is known as a distributed denial of service attack, or DDoS. And this is one that sort of overwhelms the website server, rendering it effectively unusable. And this is the same type of attack that we heard towards the end of August, when there was about 5 consecutive days when the NZX was going down. And at the time, towards the end of August, the NZX they engaged the services of the GCSB as well as a IT company called Akamai to really beef up its defences. They also worked with the FMA, and that was to really set up some backup provisions should there be another attack. And it turns out that those backup provisions, they've actually worked. So what we've heard today is that the public-facing site of the NZX, that is down, but there is a backup site which allows investors to still get those really important market announcements, which has allowed trading to continue. So what this means is that, as I mentioned, so trading is able to continue, but I couldn't really coax the NZX into telling me the nature of this particular attack. They say they're really following the advice of the GCSB and its own cybersecurity experts, and they will not comment on what's happened today with regard to their website going down. So in terms of updates, they won't be giving us any. It will be down to us to constantly refresh the NZX website, and hopefully we'll see it's back online in time for when trading opens tomorrow morning.
Interesting that it keeps happening. Okay, it's weaker numbers this week, so you've got the latest consumer confidence survey results out, and trouble on the horizon?
Yeah, look, it has really been a week of numbers. I feel like I'm coming on the show every night to talk about some.
And you'll have some more tomorrow and the next day too.
The next day it's non-stop. So we've got Westpac's quarterly survey of consumer confidence. Other banks do a monthly survey. This is for the 3 months ending September, and it shows that, surprise, surprise, headline confidence has taken a step back in the 3 months ended September, and it's now at levels that were last seen during the GFC. But what is really interesting, what stood out to me, was the actual breakdown for different age demographics. And what we learned was from the most recent result is that it was young people's confidence that took the biggest knock over the past 3 months. And that's for people aged 18 to 29. And it fell about 10 points, and it's just a hair over 100 on the index, which means that they're just slightly confident. And the reason for this fall in this particular age group is that, a lot of young people, they tend to work in the hospitality and tourism industry. These are industries that have been battered by the pandemic, and so they've been a little bit tight with their purse strings when it comes to discretionary spending. And one of the other big concerns that this particular demographic is facing is that obviously the government's taken on a lot of debt to service all these fiscal costs in response to the pandemic. Well, a lot of young people are feeling a bit anxious about this. They know that in the future this is going to have to be paid down, and that's weighing down consumer confidence amongst young people. Interesting, or unsurprisingly, this was what we got from the last result. It's older people over the age of 50. They continue to be the most pessimistic age group. That's because older people tend to be more susceptible to the coronavirus. And also, these people are seeing a lot of fluctuations in their KiwiSaver, which is causing anxiety. It's because of this widespread volatility we've seen in stock markets around the world. The economic data out from Westpac today, they also gave us a regional breakdown. Unsurprisingly, Auckland was the most pessimistic region in the country, but we did see optimism improve in some regions, most notably in the Bay of Plenty, which has been had a very strong performance in its primary industries, and that's led to a bit of a jump there, and it's now in sort of optimistic territory against this index. So this result does kind of confirm some things that we already knew. It's added a little bit more detail, and we've got a lot more interesting economic numbers to get to this week. We've got the GDP numbers out towards the end of the week, and also the Treasury's pre-election fiscal and economic forecast out tomorrow.
Yep, that's where they basically open the government books and say how many coins are in there.
Exactly.
Let's move on to the markets. What have you got for us in terms of numbers?
As I mentioned, the NZX is still operating, and it closed down about 19 points to 11,770. Our dollar is at 67.2 US cents, 91.7 Australian, and 52.2 British pence. And gold, it's made a bit of ground over the past day. It's up to $1,966 US dollars an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. The ball is back in Rugby Australia's court as the wrangling over looming Bledisloe Cup matches reaches the most powerful people on either side of the Tasman. After calling Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison last night to clear the air, Jacinda Ardern today confirmed the quarantine rules have changed for the Wallabies. They'll be able to train in small bubbles 3 days after they arrive and as a full squad from day 6. All Blacks coach Ian Foster hopes that means everything's now in place for the Wallabies to cross the ditch. But Rugby Australia aren't rushing to confirm the games just yet. Clay Wilson reports.
See you here next month. That was the message New Zealand Rugby sent to Rugby Australia on Twitter this morning after Jacinda Ardern confirmed the government would relax quarantine rules for the Wallabies.
Because of the risk profile for Australia being lower relative to some of the other teams that have been talked about previously, that full squads can train together from the 6-day mark.
The announcement and the All Blacks friendly tweet to the Wallabies has so far been met with radio silence by Rugby Australia. But it does mean the Wallabies can train as a full squad within a week of arriving in New Zealand. That means they'll have identical build-ups for New Zealand Rugby's preferred date for the first Bledisloe Test, the weekend of October 10 and 11. All Blacks coach Ian Foster is confident any concerns from across the ditch will have been eased ahead of the Super Rugby Australia final this weekend.
They've asked for more time after Super Rugby final on the 19th, so now they've got 2 or 3 clear days to make those assessments before they come over and have an adequate preparation time. And not only adequate, it's equal to ours.
While there is optimism from the All Blacks, Sydney Morning Herald rugby writer Tom Decent warns today's developments were simply just a step in the right direction.
Obviously, it's far better being able to train without being in strict hotel quarantine for a lot longer, but Rugby Australia is at the position that, there's no reason why we can't still play those games on the 17th and 24th. So I think there's a little bit of water to go under the bridge before we see an official announcement.
It's a delay caused by the complex nature of the situation. New Zealand Rugby want the first Bledisloe match earlier to give the All Blacks a better preparation for the Rugby Championship, to be hosted in Australia during November and December. That tournament will require the All Blacks to spend 9 weeks in Australia, raising questions about the availability of some players, especially those with young families. Ian Foster says no player has told him they won't travel, but he concedes it's a big commitment.
There's no doubt that it's something that sports people have been asked to do this year if you want your sport to continue, and then people have been asked to make some sacrifices, and that's clearly a significant one. And we'll treat that issue with the respect that it deserves by talking to players about it.
Foster says players would have to commit to the entire schedule of the Rugby Championship.
We're accumulating facts on what quarantine looks like in Australia, and the possibility, can we bring people in late? Can we send people home early? I think they're highly unlikely. And so once we get all that information, we'll put it in front of our players and say, well, here's the situation. And we'll do what we always do, is say, what do you think?
The same is now being asked of Rugby Australia when it comes to next month's Bledisloe Cup matches. For their part, New Zealand Rugby are optimistic they'll get what they want. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
Jamie Lee Ross is pinning his hopes of getting back into Parliament on the fortunes of Billy Te Kahika in the Te Tai Tokerau seat. The disgraced former National MP announced this morning that he won't be standing in Botany, the seat he's held since 2011. Mr Ross's Advance New Zealand party teamed up with Billy TK's controversial Public Party, and their electoral fortunes now depend on them getting either 5% of the vote or the Far North Māori seat. Our reporter Katie Doyle and visual journalist Dan Cook headed to Botany to find out what voters there think.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media.
At the 2017 election, as a National Party MP, Jamie Lee Ross won the Botany seat with more than 60% of the vote. But since then, Mr Ross has had a spectacular falling out with National, leaving the party but remaining in Parliament as an independent MP to represent his Auckland electorate. He's also awaiting trial on electoral fraud charges laid by the Serious Fraud Office. He'd been gearing up to contest the seat again, up against National's Christopher Luxon and Labour's Naisi Chen. But this morning he changed tact and pulled out of the race. Voters in Botany aren't too upset by the news.
Fantastic and good riddance to him.
Do you think people are feeling abandoned by him at all?
Not at all. He's let us down a lot over the years, so time to go, I think.
Do you think he had any chance of winning the seat this time round?
No way. Everyone's saying that he hasn't got a show.
I live this area more than 20 years, and always this year a lot of people support National Party.
Don't know the party, but him, not very impressed with him.
Why is that?
Oh, just his morals and things he's done.
I think he's made a series of blues, actually.
Do you think the people of Botany will be feeling, let down at all that he's no longer going to stand in the seat?
No, I don't. I don't think they will.
Jamie Lee Ross recently decided to merge his Advance New Zealand party with the New Zealand Public Party, led by Billy Te Kahika. It's that partnership that Mr Ross says has prompted him to drop out of the Botany race. Mr Ross, who will now be second on the party's list, wants to focus on Advance New Zealand's nationwide campaign so Mr Te Kahika can focus on winning Te Tai Tokerau.
So we had to make a call. Which one of us is the person who runs hard in an electorate seat? Which one of us is the one who runs the campaign nationwide and brings the team together? And so I'm effectively taking on that role. Billy is energetic and working hard in Tai Tokerau. He's a fighter that will bring the fight to the Labour Party there.
Botany is a safe National seat. In 2017, National got 60% of the party vote. Jamie Lee Ross is adamant he didn't drop out of the Botany race because he didn't like his chances of winning.
This was turning out to be a three-way race. The Labour candidate, Naisi Chen, is strong and working hard. The National Party's obviously got support here as well. But equally, I've got name recognition and I've got a 10-year track record as the local MP. I couldn't spend the time that was required to campaign effectively. I wanted to run a nationwide campaign with Advance New Zealand, so I had to make a hard call. I had to make that decision.
Political commentator and former National Party staffer Ben Thomas disagrees and says Botany is far from being marginal, it's true blue. He says, if anything, Jamie Lee Ross is saving face ahead of a big loss.
Jamie Lee Ross himself said that Botany was turning into a three-way race. That wouldn't be the first fantastical claim he's made over the last year and a half since leaving the National Party.
In a statement, the National Party candidate, Christopher Luxon, whose face is peppered on billboards throughout Botany, said he was focused on the people of his electorate. He wanted to continue being a strong advocate for Botany and for the National Party that he said would grow the economy and create jobs. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
Let's head to the US now. And President Donald Trump has met with officials in California, where 29 major wildfires are burning. The president has refused to acknowledge the role climate change has played in the record-breaking fires, claiming the Earth is actually getting cooler, not hotter. It's prompted his political rival, Joe Biden, to label him a climate arsonist. The ABC's David Lisbon reports.
3 weeks since the fire crisis on the West Coast started, Donald Trump flew in with a message. Poor forest management was to blame.
There has to be good, strong forest management, which I've been talking about for 3 years.
But in a briefing with fire officials, the governor, Gavin Newsom, hit back.
57% of the land in this state is federal forest land. 3% is California.
With the cameras rolling, he put to the president his own view.
When we're having heat domes, the likes of which we've never seen in our history, the hottest August ever in the history of this state, the ferocity of these fires, the drought, 5+ years, losing 163 million trees to that drought, something's happened to the plumbing of the world. And we come from a perspective, humbly, where we submit the science is in and observed evidence is self-evident that climate change is real.
Climate-skeptical president responded in an exchange with another official.
It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Hey, well, I don't think science knows, actually. Tom?
Climate change has barely rated a mention in the campaign so far, until now.
It's happening everywhere, and it's happening now. And it affects us all.
Speaking from his home state of Delaware, Joe Biden listed climate change as one of the 4 historic crises facing the nation, along with the coronavirus, the shattered economy, and the reckoning on race playing out on the streets. And he laid the blame for all 4 at the president's feet.
Wildfires are burning the suburbs in the West. Floods are wiping out suburban neighborhoods in the Midwest. Hurricanes are imperiling suburban life along our coast.
Since seizing the nomination, the Democratic challenger has beefed up his climate change policy, promising to spend $2.7 trillion over 4 years, all aimed at forging a path to net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
If you give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze?
During his first term, Donald Trump has rolled back Obama-era regulations aimed at reducing emissions from cars, coal and natural gas. And he's promised to open up Alaska's pristine Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas development, upending 60 years of protections. The president's also served notice to quit the Paris Climate Accord, which he'll be able to do on November 4. The day after the election.
The ABC's David Lipson with that report. It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Love to hear from you. You can text us your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program this evening, 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Russian President Vladimir Putin has granted a $1.5 billion loan to Belarus in face-to-face talks with the embattled Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko. Lukashenko's August re-election has been widely disputed, but Putin recognises Mr. Lukashenko as the legitimate leader of Belarus. Gillian Kitchener reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin bestowed a $1.5 billion loan on Belarus on Monday after its embattled leader Alexander Lukashenko flew back to the Black Sea resort of Sochi to ask his patron for additional supports. It comes a day after more than 100,000 protesters took to the streets in Minsk for the 5th straight weekend to demand his resignation, following an election they say was rigged. Putin gave few details about the new loan, which he said Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin had agreed during a recent visit to the Belarusian capital. But he did signal further support for Lukashenko and said defense cooperation would continue.
We agreed that in this hard moment, Russia will provide Belarus with a state loan of $1.5 billion, and we will fulfill this. Now, as we know, our finance ministers are professionally working on it. We will have to continue our cooperation in the sphere of defense. I mean, the military plants in the first place. Here, our cooperation is also large, and it is concentrated in fairly sensitive areas.
Hours earlier, Russian news agencies reported Moscow was also sending paratroopers for joint exercises. Putin has also backed plans Lukashenko previously announced for constitutional reform, which the opposition has dismissed as a stunt to keep power after the August 9th presidential election. Since the highly controversial vote, which Lukashenko denies rigging, thousands have been arrested, and almost all opposition leaders have been either jailed, deported, or forced into exile. The opposition says it now fears Lukashenko could try to sell out Belarusian independence for Putin's support. Opposition candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya said no agreement reached by Lukashenko with Putin would be valid. The West has trodden carefully over the issue, balancing sympathy with a pro-democracy movement against fear of provoking Russian intervention. European leaders have repeatedly phoned Putin to express concern. Lukashenko has led Russia's closest ally for 26 years. Belarus has the closest political, social, economic, and defense relationships with Russia of any former Soviet republic.
And that was Gillian Kitchener with that report. It's an extraordinary possibility, the idea that living organisms are floating in the clouds of planet Venus. A team of international astronomers have discovered a gas in the planet's atmosphere, which they say could be produced by tiny microbes in the clouds. There could be another explanation for the gas, but so far it's the strongest sign of life outside of Earth. The ABC's Sarah Sedghy reports.
It's not every day a discovery is made that holds the possibility of something so huge.
One of the biggest questions that faces the science of astronomy is, are we alone? Is there life elsewhere in the universe?
Professor Fred Watson is Australia's astronomer at large.
There are basically good reasons to believe that there might well be microbial life fairly commonly in the universe, not that we've found them yet. And so that is why this kind of thing is very exciting.
In research published in Nature Astronomy today, scientists say they've spotted a colourless toxic gas called phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus, a little over 50 kilometres above the surface. Here on Earth, the gas is produced by microscopic organisms, basic life forms that are too tiny to see with the naked eye. Professor Watson says it's an intriguing finding.
It's a paper that explores particular aspects of Venus's upper atmosphere with telescopes that work in the millimetre region of the spectrum. So it's the same stuff that cooks your microwave sandwiches and things. And what they've done is used a technique that essentially lets you look for fingerprints of different chemical elements in a gas. And indeed, the gas they're probing is the upper atmosphere of Venus. And what they found is actually something quite rare, a gas called phosphine. And so the question now is, where does it come from? And that's where things get very interesting.
So what could be the source? The researchers tried to find it without any luck.
It's actually a terrible gas. It's highly poisonous. But the natural production of phosphine on Earth is almost always due to anaerobic microbes. And so that is why it's such a suggestive discovery.
Dr. Laura McCamish is a quantum chemist and molecular physicist from the University of New South Wales.
I think this will be huge. I mean, look, honestly, likelihood is it won't be life. We'll find some other chemical process, some other geological process that produces this molecule. But the study involved in getting there will teach us something fundamentally new about chemistry, about geology.
But she's not ruling out the possibility of life next door to our planet.
If we find life on another planet, then that radically changes, I think, humanity's perception of itself in the universe. And I think Venus and the fact that we've found this biosignature, this phosphine molecule in Venus, is really important because we can actually go to Venus, we can check it out.
So Professor Watson says the mystery is there for scientists to solve.
The scientists are probably quivering with excitement because it was forecast some time ago that one of the things you might look for in the atmosphere of a planet that would reveal the presence of microorganisms, in other words, living organisms, it was phosphine. So that naturally is what, it's the background to this story. But as all good scientists do, you've got to look at all the possibilities.
And that was Professor Fred Watson ending that report by Sarah Secchi. Let's return to a story we had earlier in the program. This is about the tourism operators down south questioning the way the money has been handed out by the government from the Tourism Recovery Fund, specifically Strategic Tourism Assets funding. Kim from Wellington says handing out of the money by the government has been appalling, should have been spread more widely. Those in profit should have to pay it back. Another listener says the whole tourism grant is appalling. I entirely agree with your guest, and this is Chris Adams from Fiordland Jet was the guest. I entirely agree with your guest. We work in the industry and didn't apply because we didn't fit the criteria. We didn't have personal loans, so didn't think we qualified. Can you really say that Hackett, Skyline or Ngāi Tahu have exhausted all of their revenue? Question mark and exclamation mark. Unfair and incompetent, they go on to say. Someone else says, as a small adventure tourism owner in the Mackenzie, we feel very strongly about how unfair the handout to AJ Hackett and other large companies was. Us small operators would have been able to benefit a lot more from a fraction of the handout, and we add more value to more visitors into New Zealand. Why give multi-million-dollar companies more money? They have deep pockets to survive, whereas we all don't. On the other side of the coin, though, this person says we don't hear a peep from these Fiordland tourism operators when times are good, which has been for decades and decades, if not a century. Now there's a temporary tourism blip. They're all pleading poverty. What have they done with their decades of profit that they have made from tourism? Another one, though, says completely agree with everything Chris Adams says about the handouts to companies like AJ Hackett. It's completely wrong, not in the spirit of the initial proposal. I speak as someone who has lost my business and hasn't claimed any benefits because my husband is still working. It's galling to know that these big companies are taking advantage.
Rnz News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, ko Anna Thomas tēnei. Tourist operators are considering legal action against the government over how more than $40 million in tourism grants has been dished out. Officials have named about 80 businesses that are getting funding as part of the Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program. Under the criteria, businesses had to be a key attraction, nationally or internationally recognised, and generate significant spillover benefits for their region. The co-owner of Fiordland Jet, Chris Adams, says dozens of businesses are questioning how that money was carved up. He says they want answers from the Tourism Minister and are not ruling out legal action.
So we are looking to see if there is any legal avenue to level the playing field up. As I said, we didn't ask for a handout, but now that they've been given out, we can't compete.
Chris Adams says there should be accountability for the officials who made the decisions. The police have been receiving dozens of calls and emails from the public after an appeal to victims of historical sexual offending at an Auckland boys' school to come forward. 7 men have now been arrested as part of the investigation into Dilworth School, an independent boarding school for boys from low-income families. A 60-year-old man was today charged with sexual violation, indecency and indecent assault. 6 other men aged between 68 and 78 years old face similar charges for offences said to have been carried out since the 1970s. The men are expected to appear in court next month. The government says aged care facilities in Auckland still need to be vigilant due to COVID-19 cases in the community. When the community cases were found, rest homes went into alert level 4 as a precaution. Many are now easing restrictions, including Ryman Healthcare, which is allowing visits from today. The Associate Health Minister, Jenny Salisa, says the Ministry of Health provides guidelines, but it's up to individual providers to make decisions.
These are unprecedented times as we're dealing with COVID-19, especially here in Auckland, where we have seen a resurgence of COVID-19. And while we're still at level 2.5 here in Auckland, that it is wise to take a precautionary approach.
Jenny Salisa, the Associate Health Minister. The New Zealand First Leader says Advance New Zealand is dreaming if it thinks Billy Te Kahika can win Te Tai Tokoro. The party's co-leader, Jamie Lee Ross, is now pinning his election hopes on a win for Mr Te Kahika in the Northland seats, but after stepping down from the botany race. Winston Peters says there is no chance of that happening, as Mr Te Kahika is putting vulnerable people at risk with his views about COVID-19.
But it's just extraordinary that people could put so many other people at risk, and particularly in this case, Maori people, given the Spanish flu epidemic of over 100 years ago, and the risk that it is to Maori and Polynesia in this country. It is absolutely irresponsible. It's extraordinary.
Winston Peters says he hopes Māoridom can see through Billy Te Kahika's controversial beliefs. The police have a number of arrests after shutting down 4 commercial-scale methamphetamine labs in the Waikato area. Police targeted 5 addresses across Matamata, Waharoa and Morrinsville, seizing commercial quantities of chemicals to make methamphetamine. 3 men and 1 woman have been charged with manufacturing and supply. Police say the labs are extremely dangerous and people should tell police about their suspicions without doing their own detective work. A trial has found fishers are twice as likely to report the capture of seabirds if they have cameras on board. The pilot in the Hauraki Gulf and Bay of Plenty from 2016 to 2018 involved small inshore boats. Here's our fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
The industry trial, overseen by Fisheries New Zealand, compared the rate at which seabird captures were reported on the 12 boats using cameras with those not using them. It found a 100% increase. Over the period, only 3% of boats had fisheries observers on board, meaning that in most cases authorities relied on fishers' honesty in reporting the capture of birds, such as the vulnerable black petrel. If re-elected, Labour's promising $60 million for cameras on 345 fishing boats. Ko Conan Young tēnei.
MedSafe will no longer prosecute the makers of an arthritis supplement found to cause serious liver damage in return for an end to sales of the product. The Medicine Safety Body had charged the makers of the product, Arthrum, with 9 breaches of the Medicines Act. It had repeatedly warned the company, Primisia Integrative, to stop selling it. Under the settlement, the company has accepted it was wrong and will no longer make and sell the product. It's 6:05. The All Blacks coach has indicated it's likely to be all or nothing for players when it comes to committing to the Rugby Championship in Australia. Players are set to have to spend 9 weeks away from their families playing or in quarantine for the competition, which also involves South Africa and Argentina and is scheduled to start in October. RNZ understands several leading players don't want to make the trip, but Ian Foster says no one has told him they won't go.
We're accumulating facts on what quarantine looks like in Australia and the possibility, can we bring people in late, can we send people home early? I think they're highly unlikely. But once we get all that information, we'll put it in front of our players and say, well, here's the situation. And we'll do what we always do, is say, what do you think?
All Blacks coach Ian Foster. Limited crowds will be allowed to watch the Trans-Tasman Women's Cricket Series between Australia and New Zealand in Brisbane later this month, but they have to keep the noise down. Allan Border Field will allow 50% capacity for the 3 T20 internationals and 3 ODIs. Those watching the games will be encouraged to keep cheering to a minimum to cut the risk of droplet spread and possible COVID-19 transmission. And 7 riders, George Bennett, Patrick Bevan, Dion Smith, Finn Fisher-Black, Georgia Williams, Michaela Harvey and Niamh Fisher-Black have been selected for next week's World Road Cycling Championships in Italy. And that's the news.
Coming up this evening, the BBC Arts Hour makes its night's debut. There's a window on the world of happiness, and a bloke who gave up his job to cycle the world in search of it ended up a very tired man in Bhutan. But was he happy tired? And this week's after-dinner speaker, the economist Brian Easton, because while money can't buy you happiness, being out of work doesn't tend to help either. On nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Severe west to northwest gales expected for central and southern New Zealand today, returning to Canterbury and coastal Southland tomorrow. So for Northland to Kapiti, including the Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country. A few showers, possibly thundery in Horowhenua and Kapiti. Clearing tomorrow morning, then fine spells. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine with high cloud at times. A few showers tomorrow morning. Wairarapa and Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, except Clutha. A few showers spreading north today, possibly heavy and thundery about coastal Otago. Fine tomorrow with increasing high cloud. Buller to Fiordland, also Stewart Island, showers heavy at times today with hail and isolated squally thunderstorms. Clutha and Southland, occasional showers, possibly thundery in Clutha. Snow above 500 metres today. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers frequent overnight with possible thunderstorms. Rnz National, it is 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Thanks, Anna. Kia ora, anō. A South Island business operator who missed out on a government tourism grant believes the scheme has totally missed the mark and could land the government in court. About 80 businesses have got more than $40 million in funding or loans as part of the government's Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program. Among them are AJ Hackett Bungee, Discover Waitomo, Rotorua Zorb and Wellington Zoo, to name just a few. As part of the qualifying criteria, businesses had to be a key attraction, nationally or internationally recognised, and generate significant spillover benefits for the region, a region that would be severely diminished should the business fold. 24 South Island tourism operators are now questioning the way the money was carved up, and they want to please explain from the Minister before they decide whether to take the matter to court. Abby Hutchins is CEO of Marlborough Tour Company. She made an application for funding and was turned down. She says the process could have been fairer and simpler, and she thinks they got it wrong.
I think there were probably other ways to provide funding to the industry that was more broad brush and helped more operators. Everyone's hurting, and I think it would be great to see the government come in behind everybody, not sort of ones that have been carefully selected.
Do you think they're kind of picking winners, or...?
I actually don't know if that's what they've done. I think what's happened is that they went through this process very quickly, and there's quite a few questions, I suppose, over exactly why some people got funding and other people didn't.
So did you put in an application, Abby?
Yes, we did.
And how did that go for you?
We didn't get any funding.
So can you talk us through what you were after and why you were hoping to get some assistance?
So the application was for repairs and maintenance to Howden House at Furneaux Lodge. Furneaux Lodge is primarily the first night or first day for people on the Queen Charlotte track. What we were after was some assistance in relation to maintaining that building, which we see as being iconic to the region and to New Zealand.
So do you reckon you fell into that category of a strategic asset?
I'd say we were definitely a strategic asset. My understanding is that we were considered ineligible because we were seen as a new capital project.
Right, when you were applying for maintenance, though, a grant for maintenance in essence.
Yeah, I mean, at some level I can see why they considered it a new capital project. I mean, it's a substantial renovation that's required because the building's had years of essentially no maintenance or under maintenance. But I do think that if you're wanting to preserve strategic assets, then you actually need to have a really good look across the country and decide what you think is actually worth putting money into.
And how do you think that would have helped your region and tourism if you had got that money?
Well, we're Marlborough's largest tourism provider, so we usually have 100,000 people go out on the various cruises and products that we've got. A renovation like that, I mean, they are expensive. And we don't, it's going to be difficult for us to find the money to be able to do it given the circumstances. But that money would have been ploughed back into the region through, essentially construction, all the materials which we would have tried to source locally, and the jobs that you get at the end of it and doing it.
So how are you guys managing at the moment? What is it like for you?
We've been, to be honest, we've been really thankful for all the support we've got from both locals and the domestic market. winter has been better than we would have expected, but I think the big unknown is really what's going to happen over the summer period.
So when you look at that list, or you know who got some of those, who got funding, do you kind of think they've made a mistake with you, or do you think they've made a mistake with some of the people they've given the money to?
Oh, look, I think all tourism businesses and all tourism operators are hurting. I think our frustration is that we spent a lot of time putting together an application, and we really haven't heard why it wasn't successful, other than that it appears to be a new capital project. And we think there was a pretty good case for giving a company like our company, which is, as I said, Marlborough's largest tourism provider, some sort of grant.
So what's your plan now? Are you going to challenge the decision?
That's still an open question. It's been an incredibly frustrating process, and there are definitely problems with the process. We're going to consider our options, and we'll work out what to do going forward.
Could one of your options be a legal option?
I mean, one of the options definitely is a legal option, but we're also hopeful that the government will have a think about how the money has been provided and the problems that's created, and might look to rectify it.
Can you tell us a bit more about what that legal option might look like, Abby, and would there be others involved? I mean, how would it work?
It's a judicial review of the process. So the government gave grants to obviously 130 different operators, but it didn't give grants to about another 170 other applicants. And there was also a lot of uncertainty over who could apply and who couldn't apply. And what, most people's understanding was that the process was for strategic assets. And I think the Minister was on record saying he envisaged giving grants to 60 operators, not more than that. So there's just been a lot of misinformation, and it's made it pretty difficult for operators. So it's really reviewing that process and pulling out the problems with it, and getting the courts, or taking it to the courts.
So you know of a few people who, maybe are in a similar position to you, or are concerned about the funding process at least?
Oh, absolutely. I think, whether you got money or didn't get money, I think there's probably concerns about the process. The tourism industry has been great because everyone's been, in a similar situation, so banding together to try and work together to kind of get through this. It's just incredibly challenging times, and people are looking at their options.
So is the Tourism Minister, Kelvin Davis, fighting your corner? Is he fighting for tourism hard enough?
Look, I think he's fighting for tourism in that he did manage to get a $400 million allocation in the budget, which I think, if properly allocated, could have gone a long way across a number of operators. Personally, I think probably the better option, rather than this sort of fund, was actually to extend the wage subsidy scheme across everyone that's affected, and then you wouldn't have these sort of issues of fairness and transparency. It would have been kind of a simpler solution.
And that's Abby Hutchins, who is from the Marlborough Tour Company. Some Auckland rest homes have begun allowing visitors again, despite no change in the alert level. When the Supercity locked down last month, so did aged care homes. And while guidelines allow visitors at level 2, some in Auckland still aren't taking the risk. Nick Trubridge reports.
When the first wave of COVID-19 crept into care homes in New Zealand, it led to 16 deaths. It's why care homes took no chances when community transmission of the coronavirus was once again discovered in Auckland last month, initially implementing level 4 restrictions nationwide. But since the Supercity dropped to alert level 2.5, there's been a mixed approach to visitors at Auckland care homes, with the Aged Care Association saying it's up to individual facilities to assess if they can manage the risk. And it wasn't until today that Ryman Healthcare began allowing visitors to its 11 Auckland homes, despite no change in alert level. Spokesman David King says it's been a balancing act.
We have a clinical team that assess the risk, and it was their view that we should be conservative, and we were. But as time goes on, we think it's okay to open up. The desire to visit relatives is really, really strong, obviously.
Mr King says under 12s are not allowed as it's harder to control social distancing with children, and there are other restrictions in place too.
2 people at a time for a half-hour visit. The people visiting will have to wear face masks, fill in a health declaration and have their temperatures checked. So we're taking every precaution we can.
Meanwhile, in Auckland, MetLife Care has allowed visitors in a managed way since the alert level change, while Bupa and Somerset aged care facilities are still closed to visitors, apart from compassionate and palliative care reasons. Professor of Public Health at the University of Otago, Michael Baker, says Auckland rest homes do need to be taking a more cautious approach compared to the rest of the country.
Certainly in Auckland at the moment, there is still the possibility that we have community transmission and new cases occurring. So given that possibility in Auckland, we need to be particularly careful that we're not introducing this virus into very vulnerable people in aged care facilities.
And that's a sentiment echoed across the Tasman. In Australia, nearly 600 people have died in aged care facilities. And there are active outbreaks in 83 rest homes. Melbourne University epidemiologist Dr Tony Blakely says allowing visitors is a calculated risk.
What we've learned in Victoria is on the side other than the visitors is how you structure your aged care facilities matter. The quality of infection control, if there is an infection in there. You want to make sure that workers are only working in one rest home so that if something does happen, it's not quickly transmitted. Those system things on the side of the provision of aged care are critical.
Dr Blakely says with only a couple of new cases a day in New Zealand, the risk of any one person taking the virus into a rest home is small. He believes the precautions rest homes here are taking, such as social distancing, mask wearing and temperature checks, are sufficient.
We have to keep living. You have to learn to live with the virus, even if you're in a country like New Zealand that's still trying to eliminate it. People still need to keep contact with their loved ones, their friends, their family. So it sounds a perfectly reasonable strategy. Important, though, that you also set up in case something happens that you can quickly isolate the person who's infected, get them out of the rest home. But I don't see any problem with what you've described. You have to take some sensible risks with COVID.
Bupa and Somerset aged care facilities wouldn't say when they'll consider allowing visitors at their Auckland facilities. For Checkpoint, Nick Trowbridge.
It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Despite being a small country in the Caribbean, Cuba has an army of white coats. Medical professionals they're prepared to send abroad to help other countries deal with COVID-19. It's not only helping on a health front, it's also boosting Cuba's prominence on the international stage. Caroline Malone reports.
The coronavirus outbreak may be overwhelming the healthcare system in many countries, but Cuba has so many doctors it's been sending them to help abroad. Known as an army of white coats, Cuban medics have been deployed to nearly 40 countries across 5 continents since the pandemic began, offering a type of medical diplomacy that far outweighs its stature as a small Caribbean nation of 11 million people. They're providing essential services in places like Peru, which has the highest death rate from COVID in the world. Cuban doctor Juan Pablo Falcon says it's clear they're needed.
Cuban doctors come to help. We don't want to replace anyone's job. To be honest, this country needs doctors. In spite of doctors training every day, doctors are needed and experienced health workers are needed so that they are able to train younger health workers.
Since its 1959 leftist revolution, Cuba has been sending its medics to help in disasters and disease outbreaks, such as Ebola in West Africa and cholera in Haiti. President Donald Trump's administration launched a mission against Cuban medics in recent years, citing exploitative labor conditions. Though Cuba experts say while some of the US criticism is legitimate, Paul Hare, former British ambassador to Cuba, who lectures at Boston's University's Pardee School of Global Studies, says most of the world looks favorably on Cuba's medical diplomacy.
Before
some bigger countries who then realized there were public diplomacy advantages in offering equipment and personnel, such as China and Russia and other European countries. So the Cubans showed themselves prepared and adroit in deploying cadres very quickly. The question is whether this will be a long-term advantage for them beyond the pandemic and elsewhere. But Cuba is seen very differently in most countries' eyes from how the US administration.
Cuba has reported just 4,684 cases and 108 deaths so far, a tenth of the global average per capita. While Cuba has a surplus of medics, there's a shortage of food and medicines in the country. Its economy has been badly affected by a lack of tourists since COVID, a drop in aid, and a US embargo on visitors and commerce. But its medics are seen as heroes by both Cubans and the people they're helping abroad.
Caroline Malone with that report. Around the world, the arts have been particularly badly hit by coronavirus restrictions. But in London, tickets have just gone on sale for the first West End musical to return since lockdown. Six, the musical, about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, is returning for an 11-week socially distanced run. The BBC's Wendy Hurrell met the cast and crew.
It's a long time since new posters went up outside theatres in the West End. These fans of Six were straight online to snap up front row tickets for the first musical opening in the West End since lockdown.
The feeling of being back in a theatre is going to be so overwhelming. It's going to be so good.
I think I might cry.
I'm not kidding.
It's almost 6 months to the day the West End went dark.
We're hearing this evening that most potentially, West End theatres are closing their doors this evening.
Leaving cast and crew shocked.
It was really, really tough, and I was like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. I hit a real low. So this is sort of giving us like the fight back, and I can't wait. I can't wait to get back at it because it's been horrible.
Six is a musical that has been pummeled with setbacks because of COVID-19. It had transferred to Broadway, but just moments before opening night, New York's theatres went dark. Back here in the summer, Live Nation was going to put it on drive-in gigs. That too was cancelled. Can this plucky show be luckier this time?
So important to prove that it is possible and move things forward, because I think the minute one person proves that it can be done, even in these incredibly uncertain and difficult times, then hopefully many other venues will follow suit.
But as COVID-19 cases increase and there are new restrictions on social interactions, being the first musical to open is risky.
Audiences will be safe. We're very confident in that, and we just have to keep an eye on every day what changes and what is implemented by the government. We're excited. It's a risk, yes, but one that we feel is definitely worth taking.
And that was Andy Barnes, producer of Six, the musical, ending that report from the BBC's Wendy Hurrell. And if you're wondering, it's divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, in terms of Henry's wives. Making comedy work without a live audience is extremely challenging. Jokes tend to sound better when accompanied by laughter. So a British TV quiz show is trying a new approach. QI is thought to be the first television program to broadcast with performers able to hear the live reaction from the audience watching at home. Scary. The BBC's Richard Hamilton has the story.
Normally, QI is recorded in front of an exuberant studio audience of more than 600 people. But in the early days of the coronavirus lockdown, it sounded like this.
Tonight's episode of QI is even more ridiculous than usual, partly because ridiculous is our theme, and partly because we're filming in March 2020 without an audience because of the coronavirus outbreak.
But now it sounds like this.
As far as we are aware, it is the very first one in the world where we've just asked the audience to stay home. That's all. There's nobody here particularly. Let's hear it for the people at home.
These are just people that you've got trapped in holding cells.
No, I've opened a window. And
The idea of recording an audience at home was pioneered by two BBC sound engineers, Lee Chaundy and Matthew Page. They've used this innovation on radio, and now for the first time they've applied it to television. John Lloyd is the creator and producer of QI.
I sat in sound with Matthew and his black box of tricks, and then I went home to listen to it. So I went home and was one of the people who was there virtually. And it was an extraordinary experience because you feel that you can see the panel on your computer and you feel they're doing it just for you, but you can hear this amazing audience of hundreds of people sitting all over the country.
It was a bit disconcerting to start with because at the beginning, obviously you couldn't see anybody. And then this enormous roar of laughter came from just behind your head.
The comic actor Sally Phillips was on the panel for this new episode. She says the introduction of an at-home audience is a welcome development after months in which comedians had to chuckle to themselves to fill the silence of absent spectators.
It was really, really great to have some audience. But I think, in a way, what was interesting about this is that you can see that it could vastly improve panel shows. Because there's been this debate for a long while, we're very boring about it in the comedy community, about whether or not shows should actually have a laughter track at all. At The Office, they were told to have a laughter track and they refused. And if you don't have a laughter track, there's a lot more space for content.
She says there are pitfalls of having a live studio audience. In some American sitcoms, for example, actors have to hold their expressions while they wait for the laughter to subside. This new technological development seems to provide a solution that could be replicated around the world.
And that was the BBC's Richard Hamilton with that report. And before we go, a bit of feedback from you on the tourism funding. The Strategic Tourism and Asset Protection Program is an absolute farce, says Tom. The government dropped the ball on this big time. The answer is to incentivise domestic tourism dollar for dollar. Let the customer decide where the value is in our tourism sector. I bet $1 against everyone that most of this money would be spent on food, accommodation and travel. And this one on the new posh hotel in Auckland. They say, I'm 67, average retired, not sure what that means, been locked down since 17 March. I'd be there in a heartbeat.
Rnz News Headlines at 6:30. A tourism operator says the way more than $40 million in tourism grants has been dished out is unfair and is considering legal action. 7 men will now appear in court next month charged with historical sexual offences at an Auckland school after another man was arrested today. Jacinda Ardern is describing messaging from Advance New Zealand, which downplays the risk of COVID-19, as dangerous. And the police are looking for a man who turned up at Middlemore Hospital in Auckland this morning with a gunshot wound and left before being treated. Our next news and weather at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We've really missed an opportunity, I think, with the mask-wearing requirements. We've exempted school students and school buses.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
13,000 people who were in this camp, which